Welcome to the Mango Effect podcast, where every week we explore a range of ideas and inspiration that all culminate in designing the lifestyle that we've always dreamed of. No topics are off limits. We get into the practical, the hypothetical, and the downright juicy stuff. I'm Mindy Russer, your host and lifestyle cheerleader, and I'm here today to talk about learning by full immersion. Like, Mindy, what does that even mean? So how do you go about learning something new? Do you get obsessed with the topic and then learn everything you can before you move on to the next topic? The way I approach learning has always been by full immersion. And I wanted to share a bit about my process for those of you fellow learn-a-holics out there, whether you can relate to it or you just find it interesting. I don't know about you, but I love learning. And to me, learning opens the doorway to so many new possibilities and opportunities. And when we have that growth mindset, which all of us who are listening to this podcast do, because that's why we're here. We're interested in creating a lifestyle by our own design, by creating a work style that actually works for us. So learning is a part of that process, because if we aren't learning, I think there's a saying, if you're not learning, you're dying. You're not learning, you're not growing, something along those lines. So it's really important that we understand what our unique process is to learning. And all of us have a different process. Whether you know it or not, you have a way that you go about learning. And what I really like is hearing ideas and hearing how other people learn. I know that may sound a little nerdy, but it's super fun because there are always things that I can approach differently based on their style and based on how they do it. And over time, you start creating and kind of piecing together your own learning approach, which works for you. And we're all really, really different when it comes to this. I know there are some theories out there about just like the different learning styles. And I guess according to research, some of it's not really completely accurate. You have your audio visual learners. You have people that do well with like hands-on. You have just lots of different types of styles. But I guess, I don't know. It's not exactly scientific, but I don't know about you. I have a process in a way that I learn. I do learn by doing, but I also feel like I use a mix of all the different learning styles. I think we all do, whether we think we do or not. So let's talk about learning today. Lots of stuff about learning. So I'll share some funny stories. All right. We always like the story time with Mindy, right? So let's talk about learning. One of the first things I was really interested in learning about that I can remember as a kid was learning about diets and food. I don't know. I had this obsession with food, and I really wanted to understand how nutrients worked. I was really interested in how it fueled our brain and body. And so for me, I went on this quest to learn about diets, and then I tried them all. I've tried just about. If you've listened to the podcast, you've heard a lot of the diets I've tried. I've tried a lot of diets over time, and I wouldn't call them diets per se because they weren't all just, when I think of the word diet, I think of trying to lose weight. Some of the diets were more about increasing nutrient density. It wasn't necessarily about, the whole, I'm going to lose 50 pounds or anything like that. It's more about a way of living and a way of eating for me. So I tried lots of diets, and typically my process would look like this. I would hear somebody talk about a diet, usually on a podcast. Yes, I listened to podcasts way back in the day. And I would say, that's really interesting. It would pique my interest. Then I would tend to go do a Google search or something along those lines to just kind of look it up and say, is this scientifically based or not so much? And then I would also look for the books, like the main books about that type of eating. I would usually check them out from the library because a lot of times diet books are not something that I want to keep on my bookshelf. And then, you read it and you're like, it resonates, it doesn't resonate. And then you start correlating. So I would say, this person says I should go high fat. For instance, go keto. Keto was such a big thing, especially a few years back. And I'm going to eat like mounds of butter, and I'm going to eat lots of coconut oil, lots of avocados, olive oil. And I'm just going to like douse myself in fats, right? This is really going to work well. And then you actually start trying it and see how you feel. And yes, there are always caveats to every single diet. I understand this. Let's not get nitpicky. But you try it on yourself. So you always have to experiment. It doesn't matter what the science says. It doesn't matter what some expert that you respect has told you. You still have to try it out for yourself. And it may or may not work as you expect. Everybody's body is really different. And then you figure out, do I like this diet? First of all, I have to actually like the diet. If it's a way of eating that I just really despise, it's not going to last. So I have to either somewhat like it, and it has to be somewhat satisfying, and then I decide to try it for a certain period of time. So then usually it's about 30, 60, 90 days thereabouts, where I will try a specific diet and just see how I feel. If I'm really getting nerdy, I will also measure my blood levels, and I'll run blood tests and labs and such just to see if it's actually improving the things I wanted to improve. And so, for example, for me, my body type and just how my body works, it doesn't work well on high fat. I do so much better when it is a little bit more higher carb. But I've had to learn that over time, and I've tried a bazillion different versions of the low carb diet, and it just never worked for me, and my cholesterol would go sky high, and my doctors would say, "What the heck are you doing, Mindy? This is not good." And I also didn't feel well. So for me, I kind of figured it out, but it took me, I would say, probably like 6 to 8 years to really figure out what my body liked, and then to be okay with that. And so diet and exercise and all of that good stuff is really fun to experiment with. And if you are looking to experiment with something and you want to obsess or learn about something, I do recommend diet and exercise, but I'm just a health nut, so that's me. Another fun thing to learn about for those of you who are in the business space, entrepreneurial space, I know a lot of you are because I talk to a lot of you. The business models aspect is something that is really interesting. No matter what type of entrepreneur you are, you have some type of business model. So what's fascinating to me is, how do people make money? As simple, if you really boil it down, as simple as it sounds, how do all of these businesses actually make money? How do they bring in revenue? And then what does that business model look like? Is that a business model or a revenue stream that I actually want to incorporate into my own business? And so this has been something that has really interested me, especially over the last decade or so, where I have really focused on building my own business and building it in a way that works for me. And what I have learned along the way is I've tried a lot of things that have not worked. And you're like, oh, that was about 6 months of time that I wasted on an initiative that just didn't pan out. But moving on, right? You have to try things. And I think the better you get at learning and learning how you learn, the more effective your learning process is going to be. And you will actually be able to shortcut that learning process. You'll be able to do it much quicker. You'll be able to learn more about yourself and just how you work over time, and to figure out exactly, will that actually work for me, or is that even worth testing? So figuring out that process, especially as it applies to business, has been one of the biggies for me. And I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to figure it out. There are still certain aspects of my business that I like more than others. There are certain aspects I'm like, I wish I could, build up this revenue stream a little higher so, I can maybe cut down or just work with a few select one-to-one clients. But the one-to-one client work is also pretty good, and I have a pretty good process for that, and I can help people at a deeper level. So there are so many different pros and cons to different business models. And the nice thing is you can try on more than one at once. And I think a lot of people think it's all or nothing. Like if you're, for example, in my space, if you are a course creator, it's like, that's all I do. I launch every quarter. I launch once a year or twice a year, and everything leads to the launch. And I'm like, well, what about all the other revenue? Like, do you have ongoing revenue, recurring revenue? No. It's just about the launches. I'm a little bit skeptical, first of all, because I feel like every healthy business has multiple streams of revenue. You never want to depend on just one. So you have to have other streams coming in. But is that your main business revenue? Stream? Is it affiliates? Some people like affiliates and do affiliate marketing. Others are high level consultants. Others have courses and programs, or others are freelancers and just work with great clients on fun projects that they love. There's so many different ways to go about building a business that works for you, but you do have to know what is going to work for you. For example, rule number 1, if you do not like selling, you should not start a business. That's kind of foundational. So you are going to be selling in some way, shape, or form. If selling is not in your DNA and you're like, Mindy, I just can't sell, you either need to hire a sales team, or you need to go back to having a job, because selling is really foundational. So I wouldn't consider that a business model per se, as in it's a foundational skill. So being able to determine the difference between a skill that you need to learn to do your craft or to do your business, to do your work, and then also what type of business model is going to work for you. Those are two very, very different things. And I think a lot of times people get them confused. So business models is super fun to learn. And one of the ones that I tried was actually going the course creation route, like a static course that was up there, that was really hefty, it was like, I think it was 7 modules that I did with like multiple, like at least 7 to 10 lessons each, plus a whole library of FAQs. I'm like, this is my whole entire process put into a course, and I'm going to sell this thing, on Evergreen. It didn't work so well. And I tried multiple times to launch it on my own, and then also with the help of, some really good course experts programs. And they gave me a lot of good feedback. And the feedback was, Mindy, you should actually kind of switch the way you're teaching it and, try to offer it in more of a live setting, because that's where you do your best. So it's really interesting to experiment with things and figure out, are they going to work for you and are they not? For example, I feel so much more alive and interested in what I'm talking about when I am doing something live. Like if I'm teaching something live and there's faces and people looking at me on the Zoom screen, I get really excited because I'm getting that visual feedback. It's a lot more challenging for me to actually create like this polished course in front of, a video camera where I cannot get that visual feedback from my audience. And I think maybe that will change over time once I get more practice, and once I learn more about my audience, I'll be able to picture them there. But for me right now, it really makes sense to deliver my courses and programs live. And just that one subtle shift has made a tremendous difference in the amount of revenue, first of all, but also the impact that I'm able to have, and just the two-way conversation and relationship building that is helping me to grow my business model. So thinking through different things, and when you are told that, this is the one right only way to do something, to build a business, it's not. There are a mazillion ways to build a business, and you get to choose what works for you. And when it stops working, you can switch. You have the opportunity to pivot. You can actually switch your niche. You can switch what you offer. You can switch the target audience. There are so many different things you can switch when it comes to business. It's all about getting creative, being adaptive, and being resilient. All right. Another fun thing that I've really enjoyed learning about, relationship styles. So I get obsessed with different things along the way, and relationship styles is one of them. I grew up in a very conservative home where it was one man, one woman for life. Like there were no other options. Like that was it. If you wanted anything outside that, too bad. You're out of luck. So growing up, like once I came out of that, especially in my 20s and really getting into my 30s though, I really wanted to explore different relationship styles just out of curiosity. And I'm like, I wonder if that would work for me. So looking at polyamory, looking at opening up, so a little bit more of like an open marriage, looking at different types of relationship styles, like just even looking at the dynamic that I have with my partner and, who's the more dominant versus the more, the leader versus the follower type, So many ways to play with relationship styles. Polyamory. I mean, there are so many different things that you can do relationship wise to have fun and to explore, whether you are with one partner and you believe in monogamy, or you are open-minded and want to explore having relationships with multiple partners. It's all fair game, especially when you learn about them. So for me, it was really fascinating just to go down that road and read a lot of books about a lot of different relationship styles and then try them, but in very small doses. First of all, talk with the partner, of course, make sure he's on board and game for whatever this experiment is, but then really trying it in something as subtle as, just having a conversation with somebody about or a different relationship style. So I feel like there are so many ways that we can play and that we can learn, based on whatever you're curious about. We're always curious about something. So if relationships is more your thing and you are curious about studying that and learning about that, there are a bazillion books out there that you can read about relationship styles. So for me, it's kind of a process of when I get an idea in my head, I like to just read everything I can about it, and it's usually for a short period of time. So Jason, my partner, calls it, he's like, whenever you learn something, it's like by full immersion. Like, that's all Mindy's talking about. So for like 6-8 weeks, could be longer depending on the topic. That's all Mindy's talking about. Like one of my most recent ones was, you heard me talk about it on the podcast actually, about chronotypes and sleep. I was obsessed with sleep. Like every single book that I could find on sleep, I was listening to it, reading some of them on Kindle as well. And then I was also like listening to every single podcast I could find, every single expert's TED Talks on it. I was just doing everything sleep related. And then it took me probably about, I would say 3 to 4 months to really find find my groove with sleep and my comfort level with what I had learned and how to apply it. And I started testing. So I started changing my sleep schedule. I started playing with when I eat, what foods I eat. So it turned into an experiment once I felt like I had enough information to start testing things. So everybody's a little bit different in how they learn. But if you're like me and you learn by full immersion, then just you get to the bottom of whatever it is you're trying to learn faster than a lot of people who just kind of dabble. You know what I'm talking about. Like, get obsessed for a little period of time, and then you know whether or not it's a go. That's how I see it. You can really channel all of that curiosity into momentum to lead you where you want to go. So while you are like passionate about this thing, like, go with it. You can kind of ignore other aspects of learning and just lean into your curiosity as a driver. And this is something that I learned from The Art of Impossible by Steven Kotler. He talks a lot about this in that book. If you haven't read it, it's excellent. I will put the link in the show notes. It is one of the most thoughtful books that really helped me understand how we achieve mastery, how we live our life with intention, how we figure out learning and how to approach the process of learning. And so a lot of his thoughts and ideas kind of come through in this episode too. I really resonate with his approach to learning, which is very similar to this like full immersion approach. So what is the process? What is my process for learning? If you want to take notes, you can. My process for learning, it pretty much, usually I would say it starts with a problem that I want to solve. So there's a problem and I'm dealing with it. I'm like, this is a problem, isn't it, Mindy? Yes, Mindy, this is a problem. I wonder what I should do about this. Mindy, maybe you should ask yourself a really good question about how to solve this problem. So it usually leads to a question that I have. I'm like, okay, there's this problem, and here's my question. I need to have a starting point to ask a really good question that will lead me to what I want to search next. So usually I will write down that question, and then that will lead to a Google search. I mean, most of us kind of search for things on the web, internet, whatever you want to call it. So I will usually start searching for things on Google, and there will be some things that kind of pop to the top. Some of them often are like a little bit fluffy, or you look at them and you're like, that's somebody's just paid advertising. They're trying to like hack the algorithm and pop to the top of the search engine results. So you have to sift through a little bit of stuff. But a lot of times I will be able to find an expert or two. So I usually am looking for a credible source on the topic or somebody who specializes in that. And sometimes I'll also, depending on the topic, I will look through my podcasts that I listen to, people that I have followed over the past decade, people who I trust. I listen to their podcasts. I trust the guests that they have on. I know they do their homework. Those types of people, I will look to see if they've had any guests on their show about that specific topic. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. Then I will usually listen to some podcasts with experts. So I really like to hear people talking on a podcast. There's something special about the podcast. It's not as streamlined and, so dense as a book. I feel like there's a little bit more nuance because we get to hear the voice. We get to hear people's first reactions. If they're truly an expert, they speak with such authority on their topic, and they can boil it down, but also, make it a little more palatable for those of us who are new to the topic, if you know what I mean. And so I really like podcasts. I like that medium for learning. I learn a lot by listening. So for me, when somebody is in my ear, when I put on those headphones, my AirPods, and I am listening to somebody's voice, there's a lot that I pick up on a topic. So for me, that's the fastest way for me to understand, okay, this topic is interesting, but I don't really want to pursue any further. Or, this is actually quite fascinating. And when that happens, when I have that moment in time where it switches from, I'm kind of curious to fascinating stuff, I need a book on that. Then that's when I start looking for the must-read books. So every single topic, there are like certain books in that genre or in that topic area, subject matter area, where you can look up and see what the most popular books are. And usually I will either choose books that the experts that on the podcast that I listen to recommended. Most of them are authors or no authors or cite books. So I usually write those down if I'm really interested, and I use those books first. Sometimes I will also just run a search at my library, my local library, to see, what other topics and books are out there. And I look for the ones that are a little bit more popular, or sometimes I will cross-reference the author just to see if it's something I'm interested in. The nice thing is with the library, you can always get the book, and then if you don't like it, just send it back. You're not paying any money out of pocket. If it's a book that I cannot get from the library, then usually I will look on Amazon, Kindle, send a little sample to my Kindle device, and then read it and decide if I want to buy the book. So that's pretty much how my process goes with books and just sources. Books are the most dense source of information. So if there is a topic that you're really interested in learning, you don't want to just stick with like the fluffy podcast. You really want to go deeper so you understand the principles, the concepts, the framework, whatever it is you are trying to learn. And books are usually one of the best ways to do that. This also could lead, depending on the topic, this could lead to me deciding, I think I want to go deeper and apply this. I would like to either do a consult session with somebody. I'd like to buy a course or something paid, something where it's not just me getting a free library book. I usually invest something in. I love courses. I have lots of courses. I also love consulting with people. So if people are experts in their field, I really like talking to them. You can learn so much when you just buy an hour of their time. And a lot of people do offer coaching packages like that, where you can just hop on their calendar for an hour, ask your questions. Or, for example, if you are trying to learn surfing, it's not a good idea to just try to read books to learn surfing. You actually need to hire a surf instructor to take you out for an hour or 2 hours so you can get the basics. And you're going to learn a ton more than you would just by watching videos and not actually surfing. So for something like that, it makes sense to do something paid, and you're investing that time and that energy. And then this leads, usually, if I'm still fascinated by this point, this leads to trying to experiment for myself. So once I understand the basics of the concept or whatever I am trying to learn, then what I will do is I will create a mini experiment. I've talked about lifestyle experiments on the podcast before, and I will create an experiment around it and say, okay. For example, let's go back to our diet example. If I wanted to try a new diet, I would say, okay, this keto thing sounds fascinating. I'm going to try keto for 30 days. So I'll make sure that I have enough of the right ingredients, but I won't go crazy. Like I won't buy every single thing that somebody who eats keto would buy. You don't want to go too crazy here. You want to keep this as budget friendly as possible and also not go too extravagant, I think, with your experiments. Keep them small if you can. If it is something like changing your diet, maybe you don't want to go full keto, but you want to have one high-fat meal per day and just see how you feel after that. I mean, there are so many different ways to set up an experiment. Some of you like to go all in. If that's your style, go all in. But make sure that there is a time frame around it so you're not just doing this experiment forever, and that you have a certain very specific result that you want to get at the end of this. So usually when I try an experiment, I will say, okay, I'm going to do this experiment. For example, another example would be when I was changing my sleep pattern. I said, I am going to try sleeping in a different way with my chronotype, like a dolphin, for 3 weeks. And I knew that there was some time and adjustment period that had to go along with it. And I decided to try it for 3 weeks and then make a decision. Do I want to stick with this style or do I want to go back to how I slept before? So keeping it very realistic, but also giving it enough time to work and make sure that you're not cutting the experiment too short. So there's a balance there, and it really just depends what you're learning and how you want to experiment for yourself. The biggest thing is before if you're still on the fence about if this is something you want to go all in on, then you want to be really thoughtful that you don't spend a bunch of money or spend way too much time in investing before you start experimenting and deciding, is this a good thing or not a good thing? For example, if you wanted to learn the piano, I play the piano, you don't want to go out and buy a baby grand when you haven't taken your first lesson yet. You might want to start with like a small keyboard and maybe take a few lessons before you invest in like this gorgeous piano that you're going to put, in your living room. So just common sense stuff around experiments and matching the experiment to what you need to get out of it to know if this is something you want to learn long term. So again, just kind of recapping the process. It usually starts with a problem that we want to solve, leads to a question. So a question, what is that big question we want an answer to? That leads to a Google search, looking for credible sources, maybe listening to some podcasts, reading some books. And then that may lead to something like a paid something or another, a paid consult, buying a course, going deeper, investing a little bit more time, and then creating an experiment for yourself to figure out Is this something that I want to incorporate into my life in some way? Or is this something that was just really interesting to learn and that was enough? Sometimes the learning process in and of itself is enough. And that satisfies me. Like I learned about something, back to the relationships topic. I learned a lot about relationship styles. But you know what? I'm still in the relationship style that I was in before I went on that exploration. Like I'm still a monogamous, married to my husband. Nothing else changed there, even after going down that path. So I kind of come back to it and go, okay, well, I'm making a more informed choice about my relationship style. I've explored them all. I've looked at orientation. I've looked at all these things. I've listened to a lot of people's opinions. But you know what? The best relationship style for me in this moment in time is to be with my husband. And we've been married 10 years. We're just celebrating our 10th anniversary. So I think that's also the beauty of learning. And when you approach learning as an experiment in trying things out and just learning about a topic, not with the pressure that you have to actually apply it if it doesn't make sense. But just be curious. Follow your curiosity. You never know where it's going to lead. It's really interesting to see who you become on the learning journey because as you are learning, even if you don't incorporate exactly what is taught in exactly the way the author or expert tells you should, it's going to influence how you think. And when we feed our minds with really good content and think about how we think and we learn about how we think, then that is going to make us, first of all, more intellectual, which is always fun. And then we can approach our learning process in a better way moving forward. Like we can look at what we've learned in the past and how do we reverse engineer that for the next time that we learn something. So I see this learning process as very similar to what it's like to date and then fall in love with someone. Okay, so typically when you're dating, not everyone, but typically you go out on a number of dates. You date a lot of different people. You obsess about every text message they send you. You let your brain go wild with all the possibilities. And then you go on some dates to see if you really like this person or these people, if you're dating multiple people at once. Now, are you going to marry everyone you date? No, you're not. Just like you don't actually apply everything you learn for the rest of your life. But you have to get out there and date to actually get married, right? So, or at least that's how most of us do it. I know there are some categories of people that don't go about it that way, but for most of us, that's how it works. So the ideas and concepts you learn that feel like a fit, you adopt. You then discard the others. But you always learn something from the process that feeds into other areas of your life. So just like dating, you don't marry everybody, but you probably learn a lot, what you like, what you don't like, from all of those experiences. And they lead you into figuring out exactly who you are and who you want to be in a relationship and what you're looking for in a relationship with someone that you do want to spend a longer period of time with. So I think it's just a really beautiful metaphor for how we can learn. And it's okay if you learn something and you're like, this is not valuable or not valuable to me at this time, just let it go. So I'm curious to know, how do you go about learning something new? Like I am, as I mentioned, so curious about everybody else's process when it comes to learning. What's your process to decide whether or not you want to apply what you learn? Like, how do you decide that this is a good fit for you or not a good fit for you, and you're just going to kind of move on and go past it, take your learnings and incorporate them into something else? Is there something new that you are learning and are excited about too? Like, is there something that you're learning about right now? You're like, Mindy, I'm learning about this. I'd really love to share it. So you can DM me on Instagram. I really love getting them, by the way, to either share something you're learning now or more about your learning process, because I feel like the more that we can talk about these things, the better it gets, the better that we can learn from each other and we can kind of share these learnings and build on what each other are doing. So I'm also now on TikTok. So just look up @Mango Effect Podcast. I try to check it most days, but I'm getting there with it. Let's encourage and inspire each other this week. So if you like what you hear, please subscribe to the Mango Effect Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And if you are up for writing a 5-star review, if you really love the show, that would be amazing. We are a new show, so any reviews and subscribes we get will definitely help us as we grow. All right, that's it for this week. I look forward to talking with you next week on the Mango Effect Podcast.